How many people have been enjoying the Lenten meditation book that was available here? Did anybody read today's meditation? Maybe I should share that first. Today's meditation is by a pastor named Kaji Dusa Spellman. You might have seen a little petition about her last week. Kaji says, "'Tis of thee. From the south and the north, we've been on this mad dash to the border. From the south, the violence became too much as people followed their neighbors who'd already begun the exodus. From the north, we heard of the migrant caravans and worked to join our neighbors as U.S. caravans for sanctuary at our southern border. My country, 'tis of thee. As public school children here in the north, we were obligated to sing after the Pledge of Allegiance. Sweet land of liberty, as we never defined who was covered under the ideals of the song, militias, called on by an administration framing the southern exodus as a threat, called themselves to arms, gathering their weapons and their might. Of thee we sing. As we gathered bus passes, quiet houses, and sanctuaries, underground railroads of people willing to take on a lot of people lawfully crossing our borders with credible asylum claims, and we wondered, where is our citizenship? To whom do we pledge our first allegiance? What is the color, the face of liberty? Who gets to taste the sweetness of country? Who gets to sing the song? I have to believe that Paul knew this tension. He spoke of humiliation and power and made an ethical choice. Allegiances, no matter where, had to begin with Jesus. And so she offers this prayer, my God, our God, to you we sing our highest praises. Help us to be worthy citizens of your realm on earth and in heaven. Amen. We wouldn't have this language if Jesus had listened to the Pharisees and decided to turn and run. There is a contemporary passion play by Terence McNally called Corpus Christi. The play and its histories are intertwined with Bob and my own because of a small production that started at our church in North Hollywood. The play was supposed to be for a weekend or two, but it ended up running for about 6 years, playing all over the country and all over the world. And if you want to know more about the play in particular, you can look up Playing with Redemption on Netflix. It's a documentary about it. But in the play, the lead character, Joshua, hears something throughout the play. It's soft at first. He stops because he hears it again and again, and it keeps getting louder. And he asks his mother, do you ever hear hammering? And she says, of course I do. Your father's a carpenter. Later in the play, he says about the hammering that only he can hear, I think they're building something for me. In today's gospel, Jesus hears the hammering. It's getting closer and louder. And we have been invited on this sacred journey with Jesus. We are asked to listen to the words and the story with our hearts. In Luke 9:51, Jesus begins his journey to Jerusalem, where he knew that he would face opposition from religious leaders and eventually death. Along the way, he demonstrates the presence of God's kingdom through repeated deliverance from demons and healing from sickness. Crowds of people from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem follow Jesus along his journey. Today, Jesus might have had a host of social media followers tracking his journey on foot from Galilee to Jerusalem and turning out to see him in person as he passed near their town. Or perhaps a flock of people with cameras and microphones, as you see in the interpretation in Superstar. Wherever Jesus goes, he brings signs of God's kingdom with him. Now, I admit, today's gospel seems a little bit tame. We often like our Jesus either storming a temple to overturn tables or feeding 5,000. or raising someone from the dead. But there are no miracles here. There is no rage against the machine, nor is there a tender, awe-inspiring moment like "Suffer the little children unto me." Matter of fact, it was just the other week that Herod, who is mentioned in this gospel, was inquiring, who is this Jesus? What is he all about? And then now Jesus is told that Herod wants to kill him, and his reply is, "You tell that fox." It's interesting, when we use the metaphor fox, we often think of someone who is a trickster or clever, sly like a fox. But in Jesus' culture and time, when one is referred to as a fox, it is an insult. In the time of Christ, one could speak of leaders in terms of lions or foxes. And lions and foxes are contrasted with each other to represent the difference between great men and inferior men. The great men are called lions, and the lion of a leader, and the lesser are called foxes. So really, Jesus is hurling a veiled, or perhaps not so veiled, insult, saying, really, that guy couldn't catch me if he tried. Yet, why are the Pharisees even bothering to warn Jesus? One commentator reminds us that, quote, "It is difficult to evaluate the motive of the Pharisees in the story. It's also hard to evaluate whether or not their warning is either sincere or even represents a real threat." As in all the Gospels, the Pharisees in Luke are largely antagonistic to Jesus and Jesus towards them. There are hints, however, that there is a more positive reception among some of the Pharisees at least. In chapter 7, verse 36, and in chapter 14, verse 1, the Pharisees invite Jesus into their homes, although the scenes don't play out well for them. And in Acts 15, we hear that some Pharisees actually become Christians. So, we cannot dismiss the Pharisees' motives as necessarily being negative, but on the other hand, their report itself seems kind of problematic because in Luke 9:7-9 and 23:8, Herod has a genuine interest in Jesus, not in killing him. And when given the chance to condemn Jesus in the Passion account, Herod actually refuses to do so. We cannot be sure of Herod's status in the passage. However, because of course Herod had both imprisoned and executed John the Baptist, we're led to certain assumptions. But I can't help but wonder if we, as the readers and listeners, are not intended to be in this in-between place of not sure who we can trust. That just might help us to feel as if we are standing in Jesus' sandals for a moment. Imagine you're doing God's hard work. You're doing the work that God has called you to do. You are preaching God's message of love for all people. You are walking with Him and ministering to the most vulnerable. There is only one group concerned with you at this moment, and that is the Pharisees. This was the reason that the Pharisee, and the reason for this is the Pharisees are this sect of Jewish tradition that focuses on the oral and the written tradition. So not just what was written, but also what was transmitted orally down the line. They were a common class. They weren't rich or elite. They were heavily concerned with tradition to a point. They also believed in a spiritual realm beyond this earthly existence, and this is the most likely why they would invite Jesus into their homes, and some would eventually become Christian. And this is opposed to who we hear about, the Sadducees. They were the elite, they were the rich, and they were happy with a peace between the Romans and the Jews as long as they could keep their status. They saw no concern of Jesus until they feared he might upset the Romans. So here we are. You are doing the hard work that God has called you to do. You are preaching God's message of love for all people. You are walking with and ministering to the most vulnerable. And you get this warning. Someone is out to get you. What do? Last week, Kathy mentioned, and I just read her reflection, the experience of a UCC minister, Reverend Kaji Dusa Spellman. She does ministry at the border. Now here's her story in her own words. She says, "A brave soul from the Department of Homeland Security came forward with a story that has rocked the country this week. They're keeping a dossier on journalists, activists, and others, flagging their passports, in some cases revoking visas, travel privileges, in other cases deporting as many as they can." She says, "I saw the article and thought one of the blurred photos of the targeted people looked familiar. And it was, because it was my passport photo with a yellow X that the most powerful government in the world drew across my face. But none of us would have known it if someone in the department, someone with significant access to information, hadn't taken a very serious and personal risk to come forward." She says, "So I want to turn to the centurion in the story of Luke. The centurion was a powerful soldier in one of the most powerful conquering forces in the world. He was accustomed to being in command. And while he was accustomed to getting what he commanded, he could not command his servant to be healed. Healing doesn't work that way, of course, because the illness will reach anywhere. It doesn't care about your financial gifts or your job title or your immigration status or your marital status or anything else. You can have all the power in the world, but there will be things you cannot command. There is always someone else in charge." And the centurion knew this. So he humbled himself when he saw that his powers were limited, and when he saw the true authority to whom he needed to bow did not bear any military titles. Something in him changed. And Jesus saw it and loved him for it, and the centurion's servant was healed. She says, "I spend a lot of time with people whom the government issues guns and uniforms, particularly people from the Department of Homeland Security, especially from ICE. For the ones who have spoken to me, I think they know that I love them too. When I pray with the migrants who are vulnerable to their ICE quotas, whims, and bad days, they know that I pray with and for them too. They know this because they hear it. They know that we love and pray for them. And a lot of them hate us for it. It's easier, see, to character someone you perceive to be your enemy. It's harder to let them love you." Jesus was a leader following who had powers that threatened the police state. She says, not that I'm comparing myself to Jesus, but Jesus' power and influence were powerful and dangerous because he had strength they could never touch. And that strength was love. A love that could heal anyone, even someone who could otherwise be discarded, replaced, or deported. Jesus loved and told us we have to as well. But that love does not seem to be the order of the day, she says. I look at the ways that power is yielded in the land and love exists, but it's certainly not in charge. When I talk to the people, the government issues guns and uniforms, and one of the first things I point out is they almost always have choices. They can decide to be kind. They can decide to be generous. They can decide to be compassionate, just like the rest of us. End quote. After reading that, I say, now comes the lament that we need to cry out, just as Jesus did. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent you. How often I have wanted to gather your people just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. In the face of oppression and in the face of authority, Jesus stands up and says, listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow. And so we are called to do the same. Our demons may look a little different, but we're still called to cast them out. Now, some may say that Reverend Kaji has no business doing what she's doing. It's too political. Some may say, I shouldn't mention this, or why am I mentioning this, is too political. But to be church, to be followers of Christ is to be political, just because of who we are called to be. Now, if this makes you uncomfortable, good, it should. If it makes you angry, good, it should. We are called to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. The church leaders, in response to this one incident, reminds us that the role of the church in society is to be present and purposeful in every facet of the life of all of humankind. This call to be church is irrespective of color or class or gender identity. This call transcends social barriers and superficial borders. This call demands allegiance to moral law over any immoral statutes that do not honor the handprint of the divine in every human being. Christian scripture teaches us of a Jesus who is present with people wherever they were. In our biblical teachings, we learn of a God who hears the cries of the people and responds with compassion and presence that transcends human barriers for the sake of love. We, the church, will commit to no less. It is both our God-given authority and our First Amendment right to practice our faith free from political persecution. End quote. We lament over our government's response to our faith and our practices, but we will not stop loving or caring for those on the margins, especially literally for those at the border. We lament at mass shootings, wherever they are. We lament because when our government responds, and it's a white male, it gets 7% less coverage if it is a person of color. We lament because when a shooting occurs and it's a white male, that person is represented as to be a lone wolf. But if it's a person of color, they're a terrorist. Our own language we use in our culture divides and subjugates. We lament because there is a state of emergency at our border, because we have forgotten that we are called to care for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, no matter what their skin color. I have been to the border in multiple places. I have been to the border in the high desert and in Tijuana. I have crossed the border and I've walked beside people trying to survive in one of the most desolate places on this continent. I have seen what people do to survive, and I know why people go there to minister. When somebody comes here seeking sanctuary and our government deems them not worthy, they don't send them home. No matter how many countries they've crossed or how far they have come, they dump them right at the border without anything in their pocket. If somebody comes to our country and needs medical attention and prescriptions, oftentimes our government will deny them of it. We have no humanitarian practices at our border. Jesus says, today, tomorrow, and the next day, I will be there, no matter what you say. I will not run away. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, there will be more calls to action, more needs for pastoral care, and more ministers will be persecuted by our government in the name of law, not compassion. You know, as I was writing this, I couldn't help but wonder if anybody here might be interested in actually learning more about what happens at our borders instead of trusting the news. The United Church of Christ offers mission opportunities to learn and be present in the midst of this. Why should I preach it when you can see it, live it, learn to understand it, and if you think it might be something you would like to do as a small group or even a large one, we can make it happen. And not just our borders, there are plenty of mission opportunities offered through the churches. And we don't have to do it alone. We can partner with other churches and make the trip bigger. I just want to plant that seed and let you think about it. And I hope you understand that Jesus' lament is coming down. It's not just something we read in the gospel for that happened on that day. That lament comes down to us every day, through every nation, through all the centuries. Just change the name of the nation. Though many would like to see the church silence about this, we will not be. Not about this or any other event where the marginalized are persecuted and they are attempted to silence those who are caring for them. We will stand up, reach out, and care for the least of our brothers and sisters, or however they choose to identify themselves, and do what we are called to do, which is simple. We are called to love. And we will say today, tomorrow, and the next day, until the third day, if it must come to that. And remember what happens on the third day. We will work to bring God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Amen. Now, please rise and bow your spirit and join us in hymn number